Cursed are those who disturb the rest of the Pharaoh. Those who break the seal of this tomb will die of a disease that no doctor can diagnose. It is said that the inscription was engraved on an Egyptian royal tomb, and this raises the question, is there really such a thing as the curse of the Pharaohs, or is it a fantasy? First, we review what happened after the discovery of the mummy of the Golden King Tutankhamun, which was discovered in 1922 by the English excavator Professor Howard Carter and funded by Lord Carnarvon, and was opened in 1923 AD, until the world was surprised by a number of strange deaths, which aroused the astonishment of some, and linked them to the issue of the curse of the Pharaohs. First, the mission's funder died in the same year that the tomb was opened, after suffering from a severe illness, as his temperature reached 40 degrees Celsius, and he was shivering from bouts of chills, from the effect of the fever he suffered, which later led to the death of the Lord on April 5, 1923 at the age of 57 years old. While the book, The Curse of the Pharaohs, by the writer and author Philip Vandenberg says that the death of Carnarvon was the reason for the arrival of one of the lovers of Egyptian history, George Gould, the son of a major American financier, who traveled on a tour from Cairo to Luxor and then to the Valley of the Kings, where he saw the exciting discovery. But the next morning he was struck with a high fever and died as a result of it in the evening. After that, the English industrialist Jules Wood, who visited the site of the tomb of Tutankhamun, died, and after the end of the visit he returned to Britain but died as a result of his infection with a high fever. Archibald Douglas Reed, the X-ray specialist who was the first to cut the threads around the body of the dead Pharaoh's mummy, in order to take pictures of it under X-rays, did not pass away, as he began to suffer from weakness and died shortly after in 1924. The book, The Curse of the Pharaohs, confirms that by 1929, 22 people who had direct or indirect connections with Tutankhamun and his tomb had died, 13 of whom had participated in opening the tomb, including Professors Dunlop and Foucrat, archaeologists Ari Davis and Harkness Douglas Derry, and assistants Astor and Callender. As the writer Philip Vandenberg has said, Lord Carnarvon's wife joined her husband in 1929, and the cause of death was an insect bite, and one of Carter's assistants, Richard Bethel, also died in the same year. Regarding the truth of the existence of the curse of the Pharaohs or not, we return to the statements of Dr. Gamal Maras, the former Director General of the Antiquities Authority, who denied the existence of what is called the curse of the Pharaohs, saying, "I simply do not believe in this. Look at me, I have been busy with the tombs and mummies of the Pharaohs all my life, and yet I am living proof that all these curses are coincidences." But the strange thing is that Maras passed away immediately after removing Tutankhamun's mask for the second time, at the age of 52. For his part, archaeologist Dr. Zahi Hawass said, "I do not believe in the existence of the curse of the Pharaohs, they are just coincidences," giving an example. After we discovered the tomb of Tutankhamun, and as soon as we left the tomb, the driver was going to run over a child with his car. Minutes later I received a phone call from my sister telling me that her husband had died. And as soon as we left the archaeological area, I received another call from Farouk Hosni's secretary telling me that the artist minister was having a heart attack and was in intensive care, the center. Then I did a TV talk show for Japan about the discovery, then there were floods and rains and the TV broadcast stopped, and when we decided to do a scan of the mummy of King Tutankhamun, the CT scan machine suddenly stopped working. But despite all of that, Dr. Zahi Hawass said, "There really is no such thing as the curse of the Pharaohs." But the National Geographic website had another opinion, as it indicated that recent studies have proven that the curse of the Pharaohs was biological in nature, and laboratory studies have shown that some ancient mummies carry bacteria, which can cause shortness of breath and lung bleeding. According to the Live Science website, Piers Mitchell, director of the Ancient Parasitology Laboratory at the University of Cambridge and a senior researcher in the university's Department of Archaeology, denied that newly extracted mummies, after thousands of years, released smallpox or any other diseases from their bodies, saying, "This possibility is completely non-existent. Most parasites die within a year or two," he added. "Without a living host to cling to, if you wait more than 10 years, everything dies." For example, poxviruses like smallpox can only replicate inside the cells of a living host, according to the National Center for Biotechnology Information at the National Library of Medicine at the National Institutes of Health. The bacteria that cause tuberculosis and leprosy also require living hosts to survive, according to the National Institutes of Health. However, smallpox is spread by touch from person to person, while tuberculosis and leprosy are typically transmitted through droplets from the nose and mouth, usually passed on by sneezing or coughing, according to the National Institutes of Health. With leprosy, it takes prolonged exposure to a sick person to spread, because the two types of bacteria that cause the disease, known as Mycobacterium leprae and Mycobacterium lepromatosis, multiply slowly, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Another factor that makes it less likely that someone will get sick from mummy is a DNA deterioration over time. However, some parasitic intestinal worms, which are spread through feces, live longer than others, and not all of them need a living host to survive. These parasites may be more difficult to control and may last for months, or sometimes a few years, but none of them can last for thousands of years, Mitchell says. The vast majority of parasites die when the host dies because they have no way to survive. And even if one of these ancient creatures does survive, the masks, gloves and other protective gear that researchers wear to prevent contaminating the mummies will also prevent them from contracting or spreading pathogens. The Curse of the Pharaohs. In early 1923, British archaeologist Howard Carter and his financier friend George Herbert, Lord Carnarvon, ceremoniously opened the long-obscured burial chamber of the boy pharaoh Tutankhamun in Egypt's Valley of the Kings. 2 months later, Carnarvon was dead, killed by blood poisoning from an infected mosquito bite on his cheek. Newspapers speculated that he was the victim of the mummy's curse, or curse of the pharaohs, which supposedly promised death to anyone who disturbed the rest of the kings and queens buried in the valley. The rumors only increased after the sudden, early deaths of several others connected to the excavation of Tut's tomb. But is the curse real? Not according to the British Medical Journal, which did a study in 2002 on the survival rates of 44 Westerners whom Carter had identified as being in Egypt and the tomb was examined. The curse was said not to affect native Egyptians. The study compared the mean age of death for the 25 of those people who were present at an opening or examination of the tomb with the others who weren't. It found no significant association between potential exposure to the mummy's curse and survival, as well as no sign at all that those who were exposed were more likely to die within 10 years. Some theorists seeking a scientific explanation say that Carnarvon's death may have been linked to toxins within Tut's tomb. While some ancient mummies have been shown to carry potentially dangerous species of mold, and the tomb walls could have been covered in bacteria known to attack the respiratory system, experts dismiss this hypothesis. They argue that Carnarvon was chronically ill before he ever set foot near Tut's tomb. Besides, he didn't die until months after his first exposure, and the toxins would have done him in much earlier. Last Saturday, Egypt held the Pharaoh's Golden Parade to transport the ancient Egyptian royal mummies through the streets of Cairo, which sparked a lot of talk among the Egyptian people about myths and superstitions. Some tour guides and journalists even spread rumors that this parade has placed Egypt under the curse of the pharaohs. They even went so far as to say that this had something to do with the Panama-flagged container ship that ran aground inside the Suez Canal, which caused Egypt to lose about $14 million a day. They also tied the curse to incidents like the apartment building which collapsed in the Jisr Suez district in Cairo, leading to the death of many residents, as well as the two trains that collided near the city of Tata in the Sohag province, which also resulted in the deaths of many Egyptians. It came to the point that a friend of mine called me to say, "Would you please call the Minister of Tourism Khaled Al-Anani and convince him to cancel the transfer of the mummies?" When I asked him about the reason, he said, "My wife and I along with our children tested positive with COVID-19 because of the mummies." I explained that this is not the first time we transfer mummies. In fact, they were transferred after the discovery of tomb TT320, otherwise known as the Royal Cache, which is an ancient Egyptian tomb located next to Deir el-Bahri, as well as the tomb of Pharaoh Amenhotep II. The mummies were transported to Cairo several times, first in 1881 passing through customs labeled as salted fish, because the customs officer did not find the word mummy in the customs books. Furthermore, the remains of the mummy of King Ramses II were unwrapped in front of Khedive Tawfik in 1886, and then transferred again to the Bulaq Museum. The museum was later flooded, so the mummies were transferred for a third time to Ismail Pasha Palace in Giza. After the Egyptian Museum was established in 1902, the mummies were transferred to it, but they were not presented to the public until 1958. It should also be noted that during this transfer no events were attributed to the curse of the pharaohs. Personally, I have had several incidents that the press attributed to the curse of the pharaohs, especially when I examined the mummy of King Tutankhamun with a CT scan. I was waiting at the hotel for Dr. Mostafa Waziri, the Secretary General of the Supreme Council of Antiquities, and on our way to the valley, the driver suddenly slammed the brakes and almost ran over a child. Waziri laughed and said that was the beginning of the curse. A while later, my sister called to tell me that her husband had passed away. When we finally arrived at the Valley of the Kings, I received another call from Yasser Shibl, Farouk Hosni's secretary, who was the Minister of Culture at the time, informing me that the minister had suffered a heart attack and was taken to the hospital. Afterwards, during my interview with a Japanese news channel, a sudden and violent rainstorm started pouring down like never before in the valley. And when we took the mummy out and placed it inside the CT machine, the machine stopped working for an hour, and, naturally, the journalists forgot all about the studies we carried out to examine the mummy and only discussed the curse of Tutankhamun instead. The mystery behind the curse is that the presence of a mummy inside a cemetery that has been closed for thousands of years leads to developing many germs. In the past, archaeologists would enter the cemetery with no precautions and would become exposed to those deadly germs. Now, however, we leave the graves open for proper ventilation before entering them. So finally, all that can be said in this regard is that there is no such thing as the curse of the pharaohs, and it is merely an old wives' tale. Skip to content. Login. Subscribe. The mummy of King Tut, shown here, gets credit for popularizing the pharaoh's curse, but the myth's origin has been traced to a London STA. Read more. Photograph by Kenneth Garrett. Science. Reference. Curse of the Mummy. 100-year-old folklore and pop culture have perpetuated the myth that opening a mummy's tomb leads to certain death. By Brian Handwork. 5-minute read. Movie mummies are known for two things: fabulous riches and a nasty curse that brings treasure hunters to a bad end. But Hollywood didn't invent the curse concept. The Mummy's Curse first enjoyed worldwide acclaim after the 1922 discovery of King Tutankhamun's tomb in the Valley of the Kings near Luxor, Egypt. When Howard Carter opened a small hole to peer inside the tomb at treasures hidden for 3,000 years, he also unleashed a global passion for ancient Egypt. Tut's glittering treasures made great headlines, especially following the opening of the burial chamber on February 16, 1923, and so did sensationalistic accounts of the subsequent death of expedition sponsor Lord Carnarvon. In reality, Carnarvon died of blood poisoning, and only 6 of the 26 people present when the tomb was opened died within a decade. Carter, surely any curse's prime target, lived until 1939, almost 20 years after the tomb's opening. But while the Pharaoh's curse may lack bite, it hasn't lost the ability to fascinate audiences, which may be how it originated in the first place. Birth of the curse. The late Egyptologist Dominic Montserrat conducted a comprehensive search and concluded that the concept began with a strange striptease in 19th-century London. My work shows quite clearly that the mummy's curse concept predates Carnarvon's Tutankhamun discovery and his death by 100 years, Montserrat told The Independent, UK, in an interview some years before his own death.